Your funding and finance strategy. I very deliberately mentioned both. Funding is about making sure you have the funds to allow for growth. Now, I've started businesses with no money. I started my very first business with $1,100 to my name, and I grew that business to $1 million business within 16 months. We were very underfunded for the rate at which we grew. So you can absolutely grow an underfunded business, but certainly funding makes it a lot easier. So there's funding, we'll talk more about that in a minute, and then there's finance and your financial management strategies, how you control your finances, your focus on cash flow. So you have to be across both. In terms of funding, most people will say to me, a lot of businesses will say to me, no matter how big they are, how small they are, they will say, oh, I need more money for growth. To be able to grow, I need more money. Fundamentally, what you actually need is a really strong business strategy, which is we talked about at the beginning. You have to have an incredibly strong business strategy to then be able to attract external funding, because external funders, no matter which type you go for, are looking, they need confidence that you'll actually be able to do what you say you're going to do, and that there's return for their risk, and that their risk is as low as possible based on the return, etc. So what we really need to be doing to generate access to funds for growth is focusing on our strategy and each of the 9 points we've been talking about. Every single element comes into a person or an organization or institution feeling confident that your business can actually do what it's planning to do. So one of the things that I do in strategy intensives and in my private work with clients is that I'll create what we call a revenue and resource map. We will literally sit down and say, where does this want to be in 5 years or 10 years? And then we'll work backwards from that to where we are today. And as we do that, we're mapping the revenue we want to be generating each year working backwards. We're mapping the profits we want to be generating each year working backwards. And we're mapping the resources we're going to need to make that happen from a marketing point of view, a sales point of view, an operations point of view, meaning your team, and a systems point of view, and of course, the funding you're going to need at different points in that growth trajectory. So that revenue and resource map is absolutely critical to knowing when and if you're going to require external funds. Most businesses don't do that thinking, they don't do that planning, they don't look far enough ahead to actually be able to identify when they will likely need funding, and instead they suddenly need funding, and it is much more occurs like crisis management, where you're looking for funding. It's now a crisis, you've got to get that funding, or you're not going to be able to pay wages, or you won't be able to acquire the additional company you want to buy. So what we want to be doing is make sure you're doing that revenue and resource mapping long in advance. And absolutely, life will change, businesses will change, but if you have a clear pathway, you're far more likely to achieve it. And preparation is half the battle when it comes to accessing funds for growth. So critically important, your revenue and resource map, and making sure that everybody in the process of you generating funding, everyone's going to win. It's a win for you, it's a win for the business, and it's a win for those that are going to partner you with the funding. So critically important that you do that long-term, long-range planning. The other thing I would say about that, by the way, is just to remember, we don't want to base our future constantly on our past. So what most business owners do when they're looking at how the business can grow and what funding they'll need is that they look at their results last year and maybe the year before, and they say, oh, well, we grew the business by 5% last year or 7% last year. I think we can grow by maybe 7 or 10% this year. And so what ends up happening is they end up in what I call a past, present, future loop. Well, a past, present loop is where they end up, because they're looking to the past, they're determining their future based on that past, they're driven by the past. So they're saying, well, we grew by 5 or 7% last year. I think I can grow by 5 or 7% or 10% maybe this year. And so they're not doing the actual planning to get the exponential growth that you want. And they're not looking at if the business was funded in a different way, what kind of growth could we achieve? Could we go and acquire a competitor? What could we do if we were really thinking bigger picture? Instead, they end up with a very similar type of business over and over again, incremental change, nothing drastic, nothing super exciting or really based on possibility. So first of all, don't get caught in that past-present loop. Make sure instead that you're going out to the future you say you want from this, what you want from this business, that you say that you want the business to hit this certain marker by a certain date, and then mapping that future back to the present. So we're making decisions in the present based on the future we're living into and creating strategically. We're informed by the past, but we're not driven by the past. And financials is one area where this happens all the time. This collapse from the past present loop versus a future present loop. Where we want to be is a future present loop, where we are basing our decisions in the present based on the future we're creating, including and especially our funding. So if that's the future we're creating, what funding will we need at what point to make that happen? It's not that it's not possible, it's that we have to have the right resources in play, funding being one of them. So that's critically important around your funding. Now, in terms of your finance and your financial management, depending on the size of the business, obviously as you're growing a business through different stages, businesses tend to get better and better at their financial management, or certainly more aware of their numbers. Owners get better educated around how the numbers work, because fundamentally business owners and founders of businesses are typically very good at what they do, maybe not so great at the periphery materials, marketing and the financial management. So you have to bring in the right experts, and as a business grows, that gets tighter and tighter. So obviously you've got to have profit and loss budgets and cash flow budgets, but they've got to be based on the revenue and resource map I was just talking about, and comparing the actuals to where you want it to be, comparing your actuals to your budgets. And the other thing people can get very strange about is not sharing their numbers with their key leaders, not allowing the team to really understand the impact of them producing results or not producing results. I've always found it incredibly important and incredibly empowering for the team to actually know this is where we are financially, this is where we want to be, this is how we're going to get there, this is the performance required from everybody, and we can do it together when we have that, especially when we have that magic sauce I was talking about of synergy. So it's very, very important, I think, to really allow for transparency in your business, allow for your leadership team to know the numbers and take ownership of those numbers. And in fact, when I work with large companies and my private clients, we will sit with the owners first, figure out what the owners and founders and leadership, the CEO of the business wants from that business, what performance do we want from that business in profit and revenue and so on. And then we'll sit with the leadership team and see if they get to the same place, and then align what was fundamentally wanted by the business owners, entrepreneurs or CEO, and have the team create it themselves and end up in the same place. So they've owned the numbers from the beginning. I just did that with a very large construction company, and the team are completely lit up. Each division is absolutely committed to hitting their numbers, taking control of their numbers, and they're doing a brilliant job. And they can all see, because we've done the strategy, because we've done the revenue and resource map, they can see clearly what has to happen when, what they have to do, what they have to lead, how they need to be as leaders, what they need to be accomplishing, to actually, they can clearly see the pathway from where they are now to where the business wants to be, and their role, their ability to positively impact that is so inspiring for them. So really critical, obviously, to have tight financial controls, to really own those numbers, but also to bring your team, your leadership team in and align them around all of the same. And then they can do the same with their team. When it comes to your funding and finance strategy, my favorite expression that was taught to me by somebody I once did business with is really simple. The finance area is incredibly simple when you really boil it down. There's lots of different pieces to the funding and finance strategy, lots of things we have to take care of, and as I've made some suggestions already. But fundamentally, here's a really quick way to check where you're at, is fundamentally own and live by more must come in than go out. Now, I know that sounds incredibly simple, but fundamentally, businesses, like people, often live beyond their means, often spend more than they can or they should. Fundamentally, the business has to come to a place where more comes in than goes out. More must come in than go out. More must come in than go out. That has to be your mantra. That is the pathway for a sustainable business, for a well-funded business, and for a profitable business. So really, funding and finance both have to be incredibly well managed, incredibly tight. Revenue and resource map is absolutely critical.